I'm looking at Jerry Johnston's book, Why They Die, Curing the Death Wish in Our Kids. Chapter 8, Jerry, you entitled it A Strong Deterrent to Suicide. And what you're doing here is focusing on the home. And but there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that homes have never been more in flux. And you talk about that, and maybe we need to talk about it now. But the good news is that the strongest influence in a kid's life still is mom and dad.
There's no question, but you know, we are seeing the family being radically redefined in our culture. And apart from that, we see the skyrocketing divorce rate. You know, it's interesting, when you look at the trend line of the divorce rate in the 70s and 80s, you can track adolescent suicide with it. And then you see we now have, you know, millions of people living together that are unmarried. And the reality is that a child needs the security of a strong family. And I might add, you know, listening to Diane just a moment ago, the family here at Crossroads, I've been exposed like you have to a lot of mega ministries. I've never met or been exposed to a ministry that has the quality of team members here. And you know, that is why it's such an honor to be a part of the Crossroads family. And I do want to say to our friends that are watching today, this is a ministry worthy of your support. The stewardship of every call, of every letter, I mean, it impresses me to no end, because we both have seen ministries that don't have that tremendous family spirit. Crossroads is a beautiful family, and David and Norma Jean have, the legacy of their life continually impresses me when I see that. Going back to adolescence, though, I mean, mom and dad, the security of a family is huge.
Now, the fact is that you've got, as you say, more and more non-traditional families emerging. In fact, it's hard to really answer the question anymore, what is normative? It seems in some parts of North America, the non-traditional family outnumbers the traditional family. So here you have a child growing up, for instance, in a home where there are kind of serial father figures, where a mother has various boyfriends over the course of the years. During that time the child is developing, without a strong, stable father influence. This has got to be a factor in terms of their sense of isolation and their sense of lostness.
You know, I've had a lot of kids come up to me who say, Jerry, I don't do drugs, my parents do. Yeah. I mean, it is, you talk about role reversal. I've had scores of kids tell me, you know, you wouldn't believe what's going on, but I rarely have ever heard a student express suicidal ideation that they don't have the word family somewhere in there. I can't connect at home. You know, we have violence, domestic violence is huge. That plays a key role. And, you know, I learned a long time ago, the greatest gift that I could give Danielle or Jeremy or Jenny Lee was to love Christy. And, you know, when I hug her and kiss her, they may say, ooh, but down deep they're saying, yay, Dad. Yeah. You know, and I grew up in an age where, leave it to Beaver, my gosh, where did that world go? Yeah. And now we come home and the sitcoms and so many of these stupid reality shows that are mirroring nothing but the external instead of the quality of character. And our young people are at risk. And I believe that's why the supporters of Crossroads are coming now like never before, because they know that Crossroads has in its scope to evangelize the young generation, to do what we're doing, to provide resources and to alert often a sleeping church to the reality of the sexualization of youth, the suicidal ideation of youth, just two of the beginning of a number of installments that we will address to say we've got to do something and we've got to do it now.
I suppose it's going to take time, Jerry, we're too close to it at this point, to begin to assess, let alone analyze, the impact of social networking on a youth culture. I mean, it's still a relatively recent phenomenon. All kinds of data is being compiled, but not too much analysis yet. I'm really wondering, even with this issue of bullying, if our kids are absolutely awash, almost drowning in a sea of too much stimulus and too much information.
And isolation.
Yeah.
I mean, you see kids now, what are they doing? They're doing this. Yeah. And just the ability to socialize and have friends. And again, when I'm doing this all the time, often I'm disassociated from my mom and dad. You know, my son-in-law was here the other day and pointed out how that pastors now in the U.S., they're training them to take their cell phones and turn them off with their families around. Because, you know, and my doctoral dissertation was about pastors crashing. It's at a catastrophic level now. And the reality is we need some old-fashioned, not only faith in God and love for Jesus Christ, but communication. Remember the family dinner? Yeah. That's almost gone in the United States. Hopefully it's better here in Canada. But I was raised in a home where you went to dinner every night with your mom and dad. Even with my fractured family, that was one thing that we didn't lose. And yet often a child today can't remember the last time the whole family sat down and had dinner and talked and communicated.
Now, that brings up an interesting point, because the dinner table, at least ideally, provides a forum for communication. How's your day? How's it going? How was the football practice? That math test, good, bad, indifferent? Are you happy with that new girlfriend of yours? I mean, there's so many good leading questions that can be asked by parents of their children, and vice versa, around that table. Do we have a communication forum that's replaced it?
Well, often it's a kid that's on social media all the time. And I mean, it's great. There's a lot of creative expression there. But you know, in the book, I kind of gave what I felt was like 10 steps for parents. Start listening. Be discerning. Exhibit, exude, teach with love. And remember, the love we're talking about is that logomai, that word that Paul used, an ancient accountant, that he would not keep a record of an offense. So we forgive and we forget. As a parent, we don't bring it up. And then embrace them. You know, what is illustrated in a pediatric ward, we forget when a child's 14, 15, 16, 17. Touch, hug, hold. Big, 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 and so very important. And then this reality of pray with them. You know?
And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out prayer meeting.
It doesn't. I mean, but the family that prays together stays together. And the couple, Christy and I often pray. We're in the car before we go to bed at night. She said a few times I fell asleep before it's time for me to pray, but at least we were doing it. And I know that you develop intimacy with anyone when you're praying with them. You begin to learn what's the heart need of their life. And so, you know, I had this crazy deal in Leawood, the subdivision I lived in, that you couldn't take Danielle out unless you came and prayed with me. And Christy was at a football game and said, man, it's out all over Blue Valley. You can't pray, you can't take Danielle out unless you pray with Jerry. And she left and said, you know, that's really true. But the fact is, there were a few after a prayer I knew they were not the ones. And there were others that I had the privilege to lead to Christ, but down deep my daughter knew that she was special. And you know, so as a parent, we're talking about leadership, Jim. And a mom and a dad should be leaders in the home, leaders responsibly with their children. Again, if your kid is sliding down in booze, drugs, sex, whatever, you can see it if you want to see it.
You know, my kids have told me this a few times, admitted it in the latter day. But
does that mean that you're older now?
Well, I am. Yes, I'm a little older now. But we used to pray together as a family, but then at nighttime. And I started this as soon as they were babies. I would go in when they were asleep, and I would place my hand on their head.
Amen.
And I would bless each of them very briefly. I would bless them. Well, I did it right through university, when they were in university, and sometimes 2 in the morning, I would come down, you know, and they'd be asleep, and I would bless them. Well, they tell me later, you know, Dad, sometimes we stayed awake and faked sleep just so we could experience it. And it meant so much to them to have a dad who brought them to the Lord. I mean, this has got to give a child a great sense of being loved and being cared for. And also your comment about loving your wife in front of your kids. I couldn't agree more. I think in many ways the best gift you can give your kids is to love their mom.
That's exactly right. And remember, Jesus talked about binding the strong man and pillaging his family. And you provide that spiritual covering over your children when you're praying with them. And I want to say this to you. I was doing 50, 100 cities a year, but the minute I saw one of my kids going south, I shut our world down. And I lived with the conviction that I was not going to reach masses and lose my kids.
Yeah.
And so I took them out of school every fall and every spring, their whole school term, to go to the best crusade, the best camp. And we prayed not only for their salvation, but for them to take that step of purity, that step of dedication. And that was a bullseye focus with Christy and myself. We said, we're not going to have a good marriage, we're going to have a great marriage. And you know, we're still working at it, but the reality is this: the family is the incubator that child is developing in, and we ought to make it filled with the Spirit of God.
Absolutely. You're hearing from the heart of the author here, and that is so much my goal when I interview an author. It's not so much a book review as to give you insight into the person who's written it. And if you like what you're seeing, you're going to like what you're reading.